Hi there, today I'm wearing my M4 maths uniform. So I get asked a lot whether MasterChef is real, and if so, how do people remember all the recipes? The answer to that is in this video, showing you how to use unit ratios and scale factors. So these macarons are what I made on the show, and I'm going to show you how I remember the recipe. So a lot of times you might see online as macaron ratio to be sugar, icing, almond and eggs, and it looks something messy like so, 106, 134, but I don't remember the recipe like this, and a lot of chefs use ratios as well. How I remember is 1 1/3 parts sugar, 1 2/3 parts icing, same with almond, to 1 part egg. Let me help you understand these ratios. So here I have two dishes, and to make these dishes there's a lot of components, and to make each component you have to remember the recipe. So I'm going to explain to you how to remember one of these components. So have a look at the little star over there. These are meringue. So I'm going to show you how to use ratios to come up with a recipe for the meringue on the spot. And remembering many of these ratios is how we come up with the whole dish altogether. So for a meringue recipe, you need sugar and egg whites. And sometimes you might see recipes that call for 250 grams of sugar to 125 grams of egg whites. That's hard to remember, and it's not useful because you don't always get exactly 250 grams of sugar available to you. So what do? So you divide both numbers by the second value. In this case, it's 125. So you get 250 divided by 125 is 2, and 125 divided by 125 is just 1. So you get a ratio of 2 to 1. Now the 2 is called the scale factor. So whatever amount of eggs you have, you multiply by 2 to find out what the sugar is. So that's why it's called the scale factor. And 2 to 1 is called the unit ratio. And we use unit ratios to compare things, to see how much of one thing is compared to another. So in this case, we have 2 times as much sugar to egg whites. Let me give you an example of something that you might see more often. Velocity. So say there's a car A that took 2 hours to travel 120 kilometers, and there was car B that took 1.5 hours to travel 100 kilometers. Which car is faster? The car that traveled 120 kilometers or the car that traveled 100 kilometers? Well, they travel different times, so it's hard to compare. That's why we're going to use unit ratios. So for car A, we have 120 kilometers to 2 hours. So we divide by the second value, which is 2 hours, and therefore we get 60 kilometers per hour. And for car B, we have 100 kilometers to 1.5 hours, and dividing by the second value, which is 1.5, we obtain 67 kilometers per hour. So we can use the unit ratio to clearly see that car B is faster. So whenever you see unit ratio described over time, we also call it rate. For example, when water drips out of a leaking container, that's volume per minute, for example, that is also called rate. So things that have time at the bottom is rate. So let's go back to food and how we use ratios in our everyday life. The other day, my kids and I were so hungry and we were craving pizza and we wanted something quick. So I used a flatbread recipe to make the dough really quickly. So the flatbread recipe is really easy to remember. It's 3 parts self-raising flour to 2 parts yogurt. Let's say you have 5 cups of yogurt and you wanted to use all of it to make a lot of dough. How much flour would you need? Let's write the unit ratio and figure it out. So we know that flour is 3 cups to 2 cups yogurt. So firstly, we divide by the second value, which is 2 cups, and we get a ratio of 1.5 to 1. Now this is our unit ratio, and 1.5 is our scale factor. And so there are 1.5 cups of flour to every cup of yogurt. So using the unit ratio, we can say how much flour to 5 cups yogurt. So have a think about whether we're going to multiply or divide. Now there's less yogurt to flour clearly. So we're going to multiply by the scale factor. So 5 times 1.5 gives us 7.5 cups of flour. We could also use an equation if you like. So it would read flour is equal to 1.5 times yogurt. So when yogurt is 5, we substitute the y as 5 and we get 7.5 cups. What about the reverse? How would we figure out if we had 1 cup of flour, how much yogurt to use? We would write down the unit ratio 1.5 to 1. Now this time we're looking for yogurt and we have 1 cup flour. So we want to go from more to less. So do we divide or multiply by the scale factor? We divide. So 1 divided by 1.5 gives us 2/3 cups of yogurt. So double check, you should have less yogurt to flour, and that is correct. And again, you can use the equation. So remember, flour equals 1.5 times yogurt. Well, this time we have 1 flour and we want to figure out how much yogurt. So we will substitute the flour with 1. Now bring the 1.5 over, that means 1 divided by 1.5, and we get 2/3 or 0.67 cups of yogurt. So using the scale factor, whenever we want to find something on the left, multiply by the scale ratio. Whenever you want to find out something on the right, divide by the scale factor. Let me give you another simple recipe that you might see a lot on MasterChef. Fluid gels. So fluid gels are these shiny things that you see plated. So the basic recipe for that fluid gel is 300 grams of fluid to 3 grams of agar-agar. In other words, you could use any juice from orange juice to beetroot juice, carrot juice, and then weigh it and then weigh out the agar-agar. But the contestants and most chefs would remember it by the ratio. So dividing by the second value, that is 3, we get 100 to 1. So we remember 100 mils of fluid or 100 grams of fluid to 1 gram of agar-agar. So 100 is our scale factor. So for example, if we only had 50 mils or 50 grams of fluid, how would we figure out how much agar-agar to use? We would divide by the scale factor. That is, we would do 50 divided by 100, which gives us 0.5 grams of agar-agar. Or what about if we're in a scenario where we don't have very accurate scales, so we can only use teaspoons? Well, a teaspoon of agar-agar is 2 grams. How much fluid will we need to make the gel? Well, to figure out the fluid, or the first part of the ratio, we multiply by the scale factor. So 2 grams times 100, which means we need 200 grams of fluid. Another recipe you see a lot of contestants use is making pasta, and that's because it's very easy to remember. Here's an example of a recipe that I found online, but you can see that dividing both numbers by the second value 2 would give us 100 flour to 1 egg, and that's how we remember it. So whenever we have 2 eggs, we chuck in 200 grams of flour. If we had 300 grams of flour, we would put in 3 eggs. So that's the trick to remembering lots of simple recipes. So after you can combine all these little recipes to make a very elaborate dish. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson and that you can see that math is everywhere. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.